Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I am super excited for today's video. You guys know I love talking about eyeshadow palettes, so I wanted to do every single month ranking all of the eyeshadow palettes that I used the previous month. Some palettes likely, almost certainly, will be repeated throughout the year, but I thought it would be fun every single month just to come on and rank the palettes that I was using for the last month, just to give me another opportunity to talk about palettes. Plus, I feel like in my head, like some palettes are my favorite and then I reach for them and I'm like, meh. There's one palette in particular today I will be talking about. Samantha March does a series similar to this. I will leave her channel link down below. There are so many other creators that do ranking palette series as well, but Samantha March just is the first that comes to mind for me. So if you guys are interested in seeing how I would rank the 13 palettes that I was using or that I used over the course of the last month, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content, palette themed content, or just chit chatting about makeup, I would love if you consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. All right, you guys, I have 13 palettes that I reached for in any capacity. Like, me using a palette could be that I just reached into a palette for one single shade. But I do have 13 palettes to share with you guys today. So up first, and I'm gonna rank from my least favorite to my favorite of the month. And I have some really fun ones, I feel like, that I used this past month, but coming in last, it kind of makes me sad, but also kind of makes me breathe like a breath of fresh air. My Urban Decay Born to Run palette. I really want to make an effort to be so much better this year about cycling through my palette collection and also not keeping things in my collection that I just feel like I'm just keeping around because I like have to. And by have to, I mean like I feel like there's like a nostalgic reason or whatever. The Born to Run palette has been in my palettes on their last two Raw series the last 2 years, which that was a series I had going that was essentially, it started out as a series where there were palettes that were old in my collection. I was like, I need to get rid of these, but I can't get my heart to declutter them. So I'm gonna use them up for this, use them throughout the course of this year, and then no matter what, gonna declutter at the end of the year. Well, this, I just couldn't get my heart to declutter. And so I reached for this, and I barely reached for this at all last year. But I reached for this twice, I believe, this past month, and I have come to the conclusion my time with this palette has ended, and you will see me declutter this in my next palette declutter, whenever that is. I just didn't love the looks that I was creating, even like my staple go-to looks. I was just like, meh, I have shades in my collection that I can create the same look from, and I don't need this palette anymore. My heart is ready to move on. So that is my last ranked palette this month. Next up, we have my Melt Mayrjane palette. I have reached for this. I reached for this one time, I believe, which the amount of uses is not impacting like my ranking. I just am sharing as I go. If I know, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I know I only reached this one time. And this is currently going on my, what is it? No Pan Left Behind series. Otherwise I likely wouldn't have reached for this at all. This palette is such a finicky palette, and I used like this half of the palette and I loved the look I created, and I always love the end result when I use this palette, but it is so frustrating to get there. The mattes are so good. Like, the mattes in this palette are so good, but even this shade right here, I didn't realize how crumbly and chunky it was, and I was so frustrated using the palette just because it was crumbly and chunky. And I just think the like shimmer or foiled shades within this palette are not, like, the quality is not great. It's super frustrating to use. You're gonna get crumbles all over your face. Loved the end result, but it just takes so much effort to get to the end result that's a frustrating palette. Coming in at number 11, 13, 12, 11, yes, is this one from ColourPop, and this is such a bummer. This is the ColourPop Stage The Day palette. I was so excited to purchase this palette. I thought this was such a beautiful curated green color story. You have a blue brown shade, which I absolutely love, and I just felt like this was like the perfect green palette. I've come to the conclusion that ColourPop literally cannot craft a good blue brown shade. This shade is such a freaking disappointment, as well as the shade Retreat Me and Lit Vibes. The mattes in this palette are really good. Like, I'm super impressed with the mattes. I also really like the shade Tree of Life, but I was just super disappointed in this blue brown shade, as well as these two. Lit Vibes I really do enjoy as an inner corner highlight. I do think it's really pretty, but the shimmer slash metallic shades, the two shades I was most excited for was Retreat Me and Nature Bay, and both are let me down. They're like the worst in the palette. I will say I'm not going to declutter this palette by any means. I actually really was impressed by the matte shades in this palette, but I was so excited for those two shades and they just let me down. I believe I reached for this palette at least 6 times, so I did get some good use out of it. I created like looks that I liked. I was just so disappointed in those two shades specifically. Next up I have ColourPop Going Coconuts. This is my number 10 and I do like this palette. I only reached for this 1 or 2 times, and it's just, I have a lot of the palettes that are ranking higher are palettes with like color and fun in them, and while day to day I am wearing neutrals, I'm wearing neutrals today, I just have been like loving a companion palette that just has fun pops of, you know, special shades or whatever it might be. That's the only reason this one is ranking towards the bottom, but this is a great neutral palette. I also am currently working on the Sultry palette for the Pan Lit palette, which I reach for much more frequently than the Going Coconuts. So next up, I absolutely love this. You can't get this anymore as limited edition. Coming in at number 9, it's my Kat Von D Alchemist Holographic palette. This is my baby when it comes to inner corner highlights. This is my favorite thing ever for inner corner highlighting, but I only use this for inner corner highlights. That's why I'm ranking it like lower, because I really only use this for inner corner highlighting, but by golly do I love it for that. It has a green, blue, purple, and a pink shade, and it's just, this palette gets so much use and has gotten so much use for me over its lifetime. You will likely see that palette ranked in every single ranking, and if you see it ranked low in every single ranking, it's like if I was ranking for inner corner highlights alone, that palette would be at the top. Coming in at number, I think we're on number 8. Yes, number 8. I have my Melt Smoke Sessions palette. I only reached for this 1 time. I do plan to pull this out in March for St. Patrick's Day month, and it likely will. Oh, I thought I smelled something off, but I don't. It likely will rank higher at that time. I believe I actually only reached for this palette for this matte green shade. I was testing a look. Maybe I reached for a shimmer shade. I do really enjoy this palette, but it's just not something I'm reaching for every single day, and I really only reach for this for that 1 shade. That's why I'm ranking this one a little bit lower. Coming in at number 7 and number 6, I have re-fallen in love with both of these quads again. The only reason I'm ranking these like halfway, like midway through the bunch, is because again, I was having so much fun with these like companion palettes, but for like everyday use, I have gotten so much use out of these palettes. I'm so glad that I pulled them back out again, and they pair really well with the ABH Sultry palette, which is my Pan Lit palette. So coming in at number 7, I have the Rowan 1111 quad. This is what this looks like. I have really been loving, and in fact I did it today. I have this shade kind of as a base, and then I created a look with the ABH Sultry palette using the ABH Sultry palette, and just used just this 1 shade from this quad. But I have been rotating through like all of the shades within the quad and just kind of using it as a base to a look with the ABH Sultry, and I have been loving it. It just adds a fun pop that I wouldn't get from the Sultry palette alone, and I've gotten so much use out of these 2 quads this first month of the year. Coming in at number 6, I have the Rowan 75 Degrees quad. I have used this, I think, more in January than I have in the lifetime that it's been in my collection. So I'm really glad. I've tried to make a conscious effort to like pull specific palettes out and just be, again, better about rotating through. I want to be so much better about rotating through my palette collection this year, and I decided to start small with pulling in some quads to use, and I have been loving them. So I know Rowan came out with 2 new quads, I believe, last year. I am potentially interested in picking those up. I'm not going to run out and grab them right now, but if I continue to use these quads in the capacity that I did in January, I will likely pick up at least one of the other quads from Rowan. Coming in at number 5, I have this one from Huda Beauty. This is the Rose Quartz palette. Y'all know I love my Huda Beauty palettes, and this is no exception. This is so pretty. I reached for this 2 or 3 times. 3, I think, maybe 4 this past month, and this is also going in my No Pan Left Behind, so I will be reaching for this even more. I think this is the perfect palette to pull out for February. It's got those romantic tones, got some pinks, and just, it's a fun palette. I love that Huda Beauty has such a wide range of tones and textures within her palettes, and this is one of my faves in my collection. And it's hard for me to say one of my faves from my Huda collection because I just feel like I love all of my Huda, especially my Huda larger palettes. Like it's really hard for me to decide which one is my favorite over the others. Coming in at number 4, I have my Pan That palette. It's my ABH Sultry palette. I use this palette so much in January. I have also just gotten a lot of love and use on this palette throughout the last few years that it's been in my collection. It's just so easy to use. I can create very work appropriate looks that I'm comfortable wearing to looks that I'm comfortable wearing to work. It's so easy. Such a good palette, very beautiful, easy to work with, beautiful shades, pop and shimmers. We love it. Coming in at number 3, I have my Danessa